And a very good afternoon. My name's Joel Hufford. I'm your host today for today's Portsmouth Water webinar on our Havant Thicket Reservoir project. Welcome along and hope you enjoyed that opening film, giving you a glimpse of what the reservoir will look like once it's completed. You'll get to meet the rest of the panel members very shortly from the Portsmouth Water team, but just a word of explanation about how the webinar will work today. Just because of the number of people involved in terms of members of the public joining in, we can't have everyone on camera and with sound, so it's only myself and my colleagues from Portsmouth Water that will be on camera and able to speak to you via the webinar. But there'll be plenty of opportunity for you to interact with us. We've got some polls we want you to complete to get your views, and also you've got plenty of opportunity to ask questions via the Q&A tool that's at the bottom of your screen. We'll get on to talking about that very shortly. First of all, let's just review what we're going to talk about today in terms of sharing the consultation updates with you. So first of all, we'll talk about why we need the reservoir in the first place, and there's a lot of detail that's gone into that, so it's important that we cover that off first of all. We'll talk about the benefits there'll be from the reservoir projects, both in terms of the environment, locally and further afield in Hampshire, and for leisure for local communities in particular as well. And there's a couple of really significant updates to share with you about access to and from the reservoir in terms of new options for that, and also as well the reservoir's design and construction, and in particular a new pipeline that's going to be needed to be built to take water to the reservoir and enable that water to be taken out and put into supply as well. And of course, plenty of opportunity for you to put your queries, put your comments to the panel, and they can take those on board. They can give you some explanations as well. To do that, very simple. If you look to the bottom of your screen, just where it's circled in red on the slide in front of you, you've got a little Q&A button. It's blown up a little bit bigger there. And if you click on that, you can type in a question to us. It pops up in front of me, and I can put the question to the panel members. We'll try and get through all the questions today. If there's any, for any reason we can't answer, we'll come back to you after the webinar as well to give you that information. And also it's worth pointing out, we are recording the webinar today, and we'll put those recordings along with all the others that are already up there on our website for you, so that you can watch them back, or you can tell your friends, family and colleagues about them. Should they be interested, they can find out more, and they can go to our website and they can fill out our feedback survey. That's portsmouthwater.co.uk/Havant-Thicket-Reservoir. And all the material you'll see today in terms of videos and all the pictures and all the detail, that's available on that website as well. So let's kick off with a little poll for you. I'll just launch that in front of you. A couple of quick questions just to ascertain what you know about the reservoir project already, and also what you feel about the reservoir projects based on what you know. So that should be in front of you now. So if you just want to take some time to click on that, give everybody a little bit of time just to fill those in, and then I can share the results with you. After that, we'll meet the panel members and we'll get into the first part of the webinar as well. Just a reminder as well, you can talk to us via our Facebook page for the reservoir project at Havant Reservoir on Facebook. And you can also get in touch as well via post and phone, and we'll talk about the details of that in due course. And just a reminder, all the feedback that we're going to get today, that will go into shaping our planning application that will go into Havant Borough Council and East Hampshire District Council later on this year. And ahead of that, we will publish a report entitled You Said We're Doing, where we'll take all the feedback, give you a summary of that, what everyone's told us, and what we're going to do about it in terms of shaping the planning application. So most people have voted now. So let's end that poll and share the results with you. So in terms of how much is already known by you guys out there about the reservoir project, it's a bit of a split. A little is the majority of people, quite a lot for around 40%. And then in terms of support, most people are supportive of the reservoir project with a small percentage there, not supportive. But again, want to hear from all sides of the equation in terms of your feedback to help shape our planning application. So let's meet the panel today. So if everybody on the panel could turn on their cameras first of all, that would be great. And just a reminder as I go through the introductions, because people are watching on different types of device. So if you're on a phone, for example, you'll only see the person that's speaking. So panel members, when I introduce you, if you could just say hello and wave, and then it will be clear to people who you are. First of all, let's start with Bob Taylor, Chief Executive of Portsmouth Water.
Hi, everybody. Afternoon.
And then we've got Simon Hughes, who's Planning, Environment and Stakeholder Lead for the Reservoir Project.
Hi, everybody.
Working very closely with Simon is Joe Farrer, who's looking after all the preparations for the planning application that will go in later this year.
Good afternoon.
We'll also hear from Jim Barker, Head of Water Resources at Portsmouth Water.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And the man who's going to tell us about the reservoir design and in particular the pipeline as well is Bill Irvine.
Oh, good afternoon.
Who's lead design engineer for the project. Also, we'll talk about access to and from the reservoir, and Andy Hills is our expert for that particular topic.
Hi, everyone.
And also as well, leisure is a big focus in terms of the reservoir proposals, and Jamie Metcalf, our landscape architect, is the man to talk about that.
Good afternoon.
We'll also talk about the environmental benefits of the reservoir project, and Principal Ecologist from Portsmouth Water, Trevor Codlin, is happy to take your questions on that particular issue.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And then also helping me run the webinar today, and also to respond to all your questions via the consultation website, via letters, and coming via Facebook. We've got, first of all, Rebecca Burgess.
Hello, everyone.
And then also Joss Newman as well.
Hello.
So just a reminder, you can ask questions to all those people via the little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to those questions very shortly. Already got a few that have come in. First of all, let's have a quick chat with Bob and Simon, first of all. Bob, initially, what would be your message to people tuning into the webinar today about the reservoir project and about the importance of this consultation?
Well, thanks very much, Joe, and good afternoon, everybody. Once again, welcome. I mean, this consultation is all about getting your views and getting your thoughts and ideas about the project, any aspect of the project. So we've already spent quite a lot of time talking to stakeholders in the local communities and regulators and environmental bodies, NGOs, all sorts of organisations about the reservoir. So where we've got to today has been very much influenced by what we've heard from those feedback responses, but you know, we want to hear more. We've gone down this route of an e-consultation, and by doing that, we hope you'll gather more responses and get a wider sort of cross section of the community involved. But as I'm sure those of you who are local will know, Portsmouth Water is a very community-orientated company, and we are passionate about serving our local community. And this project is really a very major extension to all of that. So your views are really important to us. Please tell us what you think.
Okay, and Simon, Bob mentioned the fact that we're doing an e-consultation, we're doing webinars, got a lot of stuff online, as well as people being able to get in touch via post and phone. I guess with the current situation around coronavirus, although it's eased somewhat in recent weeks, people will be wondering, why are you going ahead with a consultation in those circumstances?
Yeah, thanks, Joel, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. The reason we're cracking on is, we took advice from the local planning authorities, and we took advice from our stakeholder forum as well. So the forum is a group of nearly 30 plus organisations who's been working with us for at least the last 13 years and volunteering their time and giving us advice and giving us their thoughts on our proposals. And the feeling was that this is a project that's got a momentum behind it, and it's continuing. We're able to design a way to allow people to get engaged with the project and get probably a slightly different experience of consulting with us and giving us their advice based on this fantastic online approach. But also for those who are less comfortable with a sort of web-based, we've also got good old Royal Mail posted out documents and response forms that people can use. So we felt that we had a good package of ways for people to get their views across to us. The local planning authority agreed with us, so we thought we'd crack on and keep the momentum up on what is a really important project, not just for the local area, but for the security of regional water supplies in the southeast of England.
Okay, great. Thanks to Bob and Simon for now. We've got plenty of questions coming in. We'll get to those in due course. If when you submit a question, we don't answer it straight away, it might be because we're holding it back so we can cover it in that particular topic area, whether it's the environment or leisure or whatever it might be. Lots of questions coming up about making sure there's enough water to go around in the decades ahead. Let's find out about how the reservoir is going to help with that equation from Jim Barker.
So I'm Jim Barker, I'm the Head of Water Resources for Portsmouth Water, and it's my job to make sure that there's enough water available to be treated to allow water to come out of everyone's taps for the next 100 years. Building a reservoir in Havant is one of the key parts of a regional water resources plan to make sure that water is available for the whole of the southeast going forward. Water companies are being asked to take less water from some sources we have available to us today, particularly from rivers, and that's in order to keep the rivers safe and healthy to protect wildlife. Plus, we need to find more water to combat the effects of climate change. We're seeing our weather patterns change, and of course we're seeing a growing population in the southeast. So all of that adds up to the water resources in the southeast being under a bit of pressure, and this reservoir will supply extra water into the system to relieve some of that pressure. In particular, Southern Water, our neighbours in Hampshire, are being asked to take less water from two world-renowned chalk streams, the rivers Test and Itchen. We in Portsmouth Water here, we get most of our water from the ground, from the chalk beneath our feet, and we have a series of underground springs that provide plentiful clean water to us. But as part of the southeast, we want to play our role. So in winter, much of our spring water actually flows out to sea. We don't capture it and we don't treat it for drinking water because people are using less water in the winter. So what we're proposing with this reservoir is actually to capture the water that is lost to the sea from our springs, to put it in the reservoir over the winters, so it's available should we have a long, hot, dry summer and water resources become scarce. It's really also important to say that this isn't just about finding more water. Us as water companies, and particularly as Portsmouth Water, we're doing our bit to be more effective and efficient with the water we have. So our leakage levels, for instance, are currently at their lowest level we've ever had. It's really important that we don't waste water. We're also looking to talk to customers about using water wisely. So in this situation of more people, climate change, less water available, we all need to think, are we using water wisely? And to take simple steps that could possibly help us all use a little bit less. We've talked about the reservoir before. Plans for the reservoir, in fact, were first drawn up in 1964, but it was again in 2008 that we drew up the most recent plans, and at that point we shared those plans with our customers, with you guys, during a public consultation. At that point, the water situation wasn't quite as stressful as it is today, so it didn't go forward at that point, but we're bringing it forward now because the situation is more stressed than it was in 2008, and also the regional understanding of the water situation and our ability to move water around the region has improved, which makes the reservoir a lot more important to more people. So right now there's a shortfall of water across the southeast as a whole, and plans for the reservoir have been included in Portsmouth Water and Southern Water's long-term water resource plans as a way of looking to close some of that shortfall.
So that's the reason why the reservoir is needed. Let's talk to Jim Barker about that in a bit more detail. Jim, we've had lots of questions in around this in advance. A few have come in from Stephanie, and she's made the point initially about why you're not looking at managing down demand rather than creating extra water resources in terms of the reservoir to store water. Can you address that?
Yeah, sure, Joel. Afternoon, everyone. The short answer is we are. So there's two sides to the equation here: the amount of water we can take from the environment and treat and put in pipes versus the amount of water people want to use. So we are talking to our customers quite a lot, actually, especially over the recent dry weather, asking people to use water wisely. We're asking people to be aware of how much water they use, and that we've got a whole list of hints and tips on our website of things people can do to use less water. We're also looking to introduce a metering program into Portsmouth Water. We think that the easiest way of helping people understand the amount of water they use is to actually see through a meter the volume they are using, and we're looking to roll it out over probably the next 5-10 years to help people understand the impact they're having on water.
Okay, and Stephanie's got a further question, and I've had a similar one in from Anne as well. One justification for the new reservoir, says Stephanie, is that less water will be taken from the Test and the Itchen. How much less? Will any water still be taken, and what system will be in place to monitor what is being taken?
Great question. Great question. Right, I'll try to get too carried away because I love talking about this stuff. So, the Test and the Itchen, lovely rivers over in Hampshire. All the abstraction from those rivers, and actually the environment in general, is managed by the Environment Agency, and they issue permits. So what the Environment Agency have done is said, in conditions when there's not a huge amount of water in the Test and the Itchen, we want to reduce the amount of water that's being abstracted from the Test and the Itchen. So it's only really in dry conditions, in dry weather conditions, hesitate to say drought, but those kind of dry conditions, that Southern Water are constrained from taking water out of those two rivers. All that regime is policed by the Environment Agency, and they will make sure that the rules are being followed. So what we're looking to do with the reservoir is to provide we're storing water that flows out to sea in the winter in a reservoir that we can then use in the summers to pass on to our colleagues in Southern Water to close that seasonal gap, if you like.
Okay. So the reservoir making the most of an existing water resource that would flow out to sea in winter otherwise. Stephanie also makes the point around leakage, which is something that the water industry is very focused on improving, the amount of water that's lost through leaks on the supply network. And indeed, some companies are helping out with customers and fixing leaks in their homes as well. In terms of leakage, Stephanie says, why can't you just cut all the leaks and save millions of litres of water a day, and therefore you might not need a reservoir?
Believe me, we're trying. We're working very hard on our leakage. So as I said in the video, our leakage levels are currently the lowest they've ever been. So that's roughly 9%. Now that does sound like a large amount of water. I totally understand that. That's about 21 million litres of water a day, which is a lot. Especially when you think about your house. If you have a leak, you know about it because eventually your ceiling falls in. But actually, you've got, in the context of our supply network, we have 3,500 miles of pipes, and those pipes are in a dynamic soil environment. So actually, in the winter, all the soil those pipes are in, all the soil shrinks and the pipes are moved. And in summer, when the soils are dry, they move again. So we've got a constant kind of moving environment our pipes are in. So they're constantly being moved, and unfortunately that can cause leaks. So it's like painting the Forth Road Bridge. We are constantly sweeping our network, and we have some quite high-tech tools that listen out for leaks in the middle of the night and help us pinpoint them. We're working very, very hard on reducing leakage, but I'm afraid zero is impossible. Well, I retire with my feet up when we get to zero.
Okay, final question to you, Jim, for now. And if I could have Bob and Simon join us as well, because there's a couple of questions that have come in that I'd like to get to as soon as we can. So Stephanie makes another point about new housing. There's a lot of debate across the southeast about the amount of new housing that's coming forward. There's a lot of focus in homes on energy efficiency and national standards that are built in. Are you doing the same, working with developers, working with councils in terms of making sure new homes, new buildings are as water efficient as possible?
Absolutely, absolutely. We speak to all new developers, and we work with all the local authorities in our patch to try to influence their strategic plans. So it's for the local authority to set the level of water efficiency they expect in a new development, and we work with the local authority to provide them the evidence to help them justify the targets they set. And we work with developers to give them ideas on how they can make a house more water efficient. So all new houses are metered by as built. All new houses have efficient boilers in them. As you say, energy efficiency and water efficiency go hand in glove, because a lot of energy used in a house is through the heating of water. So use less water, save a lot of energy too. So we're working very hard on that, but it is for central government to lead the way in that space.
Okay, thanks very much. Remember, you can get in touch with us via the Q&A tool at the bottom. We had a few questions that have come in. One for you, Simon, from Anne, who's tuning in today to the webinar. She says, how much room is there really to adjust your plans, considering how much time and planning has gone into this project already?
Thanks, Anne. Great question. Look, we're open for new ideas. So yes, we have been listening to people all the way along for over a decade now, actually. And what you've seen is very greatly influenced by what we've been hearing from people. And you know what, we're still getting some really great ideas that we haven't heard before. So please do chip in. And what we'll do at the end of this consultation is we'll summarize all of the inputs that we've had from folk. We'll summarize whether or not we've been able to adopt that. So who knows, someone may even have thought of it before, and we may have adopted it before, but they may not. So please do chip in. And if we're not able to take on board a thought or an idea, then we'll explain why not. So yeah, tell us what you think, and we're really pleased to hear it.
Okay, and Anne's got a follow-up question. She wants to know what type of stakeholders, so what type of community groups, environmental groups, councillors we've been speaking to. We can happily send Anne a list of, the types of people we've been speaking to, but do you just want to outline some of the groups that we've been talking to, not just for a short period of time, but over a number of decades?
Yeah, sure. And so on the stakeholder group, we've got local councillors, we've got members of the regulators, so Environment Agency, Natural England, Forestry England. We've got representatives from interest groups like the CPRE, and we also have people who represent different user groups like cyclists and runners. We've got local fire and rescue service join the group, who have obviously an interest in local safety. And then members from County Council, South Downs National Park Authority, and so on. So a really good mix of individuals, user group representatives, and then the sort of organisations who take an interest in and regulate the process of planning.
Okay, and Anne, I'll quite happily send you a list with details of the stakeholders we've spoken to. And again, we're happy to have further conversations with people as well. Remember, keep your questions coming in. If you have submitted a question, we haven't got to it just yet, we'll save it perhaps for the section that it fits in best, but we will answer all the questions before we head off today. And when Bob rejoins us as well, the Chief Executive of Portsmouth Water. In the meantime, let's find out a bit more about the reservoir itself, its design and how it will be built. Here's Bill Irvine.
My name's Bill Irvine. I'm lead design engineer on the Havant Thicket project. My role on the project is to coordinate all of the design elements across the project, including the reservoir itself, the pipeline, the pumping station, and downstream treatment works and connections into the network, providing water across the Southern Waters region. The proposed site for the reservoir has been owned by Portsmouth Water since 1965 and covers 160 hectares. It sits next to Rowlands Castle and Lee Park and is bordered to the north by Forestry England woodland at Havant Thicket, and Staunton Country Park lies to the south, which is owned by Hampshire County Council. The area is currently grassland and open space with areas of trees. The site has been chosen as perfect place for a reservoir because it sits in a valley on clay soils, which provides a natural seal for water. This means we'll be able to dig and shape the reservoir, predominantly using the existing material on the site. The reservoir would fill the majority of the site and will be up to 18 metres deep in places, and it will be about 1 mile long from east to west and half a mile wide from north to south. The water will be contained by a sloping embankment, which will run along 3 sides of the reservoir and up to 20 metres high in places, with a new wetland habitat area created along its northern edge. The embankment will be mainly constructed from clay, soils excavated on site, but we will need to bring some material to site for drainage and for the internal lining. The embankment will have a grass covering on the outer slope and a rocky surface lining the embankment at the water's edge, protecting the structure from waves. We've looked at the position and design of the embankment and made a number of alterations to avoid the hedges near the western boundary of the site, and slight realignments to reduce the number of trees that will need to be taken out at Roundwood and the Avenue, both of which are ancient woodland. This includes increasing the space between the western boundary and the embankment, making the southwestern edge slightly straighter and shortening the eastern bank. We've also looked at making slopes slightly steeper in places to reduce the land required to build the embankment and minimise tree loss. We will need to build a control house on the southwestern section of the embankment and a new access road as well. And the options for these routes will be discussed separately by my colleague Andy Hills. When full, the reservoir will be able to hold about 8.7 billion litres of water. That's enough to supply 160,000 people during an average year. It will take 9 years to plan, build and fill the reservoir. Everything is scheduled to be complete and the reservoir full of water and open to the public by 2029. We're aiming to have achieved planning permission to enable us to start on site with enabling works through to 2023, creating the access road, preparing the site and diverting footpaths. From 2023, we can then commence construction of the embankment and reservoir itself, digging out the clay and building the reservoir. We'll also be laying the pipeline to transfer water from the pumping station at Bedhampton up to the reservoir itself. From 2027, we can start to construct the amenity provisions on site, including new pathways, a visitor centre and facilities. All works should be finished by 2029.
So Bill Irvine there, lead design engineer for the project, with an overview of the reservoir design and the construction process for it. Bill joins me now. Perhaps we could have Jim Barker join us as well, because there's a couple of questions that link into that. Bill, we've had a question in from Stephanie, who's wondering, we talk about the fact there's not been any new reservoirs built in the southeast or perhaps across the UK for quite a number of decades. Can you just talk about the expertise and the experience that's going into the design for Havant Thicket Reservoir and give people some assurance that there are some very well qualified engineers looking at the design and how that's going to be policed?
Yeah, that's right, Joel. So while I think there haven't been any reservoirs constructed from a water resources point of view, and Jim will be able to sort of touch on that, there's been embankments, water retaining structures that have been built in the UK within that time. So yeah, within the UK we've got a great deal of experience of designing and constructing these sort of structures. So flood storage structures sort of exist around the country. Equally, all the existing reservoirs are inspected and maintained on a regular basis as well. So we've got a good understanding of the history of how these things are built and maintained. And so we can apply that sort of knowledge, that learning of how these structures actually perform to develop our design. In terms of our expertise, all of our design is overseen by appropriately qualified staff. So we have an appointed panel engineer. So these are individuals that are fully qualified, experienced, many years of experience they've amassed, and they're appointed on a government panel. So these individuals are bringing the best sort of knowledge and experience to the design. So they're providing that oversight. They'll also provide the certification of both the design and the construction of the embankment as well.
Okay, thanks to Bill. And Jim, the reason I asked you to come back in, Stephanie's question was based on the fact she says you haven't built reservoirs in the southeast or across the UK for decades. Why is that? What's changed? Because I know there's been talk of other reservoir projects. People might know about the one in South Oxfordshire that Thames Water wants to build that's never happened. Havant Thicket's been talked about for decades and not happened. Why has it changed down here in the Havant area?
Well, there's no one specific thing, but over the last kind of 30 years, the water industry's been on quite a journey, really since privatisation, and it's got more and more efficient. So, leakage levels, we were talking about those a minute ago, they're still not perfect now, but they are so much better than they were 30 years ago. And through regulation and through investment, the water industry really has become more and more efficient and managed to make the water it already had access to go much further. But we're in a situation where the population has continued to rise through that period. We've seen environmental protection actually increase, and rightly so. And we've also seen the government decide that actually it wants a water system that's more robust to dry weather. So now the government are asking us to plan for droughts that have a return period of 1 in 200 years. So really quite a rare event. And those of you who are old enough to remember 1976, that was about a 1 in 80 year event. And that was the last time Portsmouth Water needed to talk about a hosepipe ban with its customers. So now we're planning for an event that is probably, you know, twice as dry as 1976. So that means we need more water available. So all those things added together mean actually we need more water available in the southeast. And the government, through organisations like the National Infrastructure Commission and the Environment Agency, we're all collectively realising we need to do something significantly different in the southeast.
Okay, and we've got a question for you from Ronnie, who's used that Q&A tool at the bottom of the screen. Plenty of questions coming in. We will get through all of them today, fear not. And Ronnie says, could you give me an idea of what percentage of demand the reservoir represents? It holds 8.7 billion litres of water. That sounds like a lot, but in terms of the role it will play, how much of a gap will that plug?
Right, okay, so it's not an exact answer to give actually, but if I can put it in context. So in the western part of Hampshire, so Southern Waters patch around Southampton, which is fed by the water from the Itchen and the Test. In a 1 in 200 year drought event, they have a gap of water supply of about 170 million litres, so 170 megalitres we'd call that. What Portsmouth are able to do, supported by the reservoir, is to supply just over 40 megalitres into that zone. So it's not all water from the reservoir. We take roughly 20 megalitres from the reservoir and another 20 from our other sources we have in the Meon Valley, and we're just, you know, using a bit of our headroom up. So overall, we're going to supply just over 40 megalitres to Southern into a problem they have of about 170 megalitres in a very dry event.
And when you talk about megalitres, millions of litres, that's on a daily basis?
Per day, yeah, they're per day figures.
Fantastic. Thanks to Bill and Jim for now. Again, plenty of questions. If you want to get the guys back, we can ask them the questions. You submit them via the Q&A tool. We've got a few questions that have come in around woodland on the site and what will happen to that with the reservoir being built. Let's talk about that now with our principal ecologist, Trevor Codlin.
And my name is Trevor Codlin, leading on biodiversity side of the project. We have always maintained that this is an environmentally led project, and although the habitats on site will change quite dramatically, we are committed to delivering something really special to replace what is already there. We have been surveying the site since 2005, so we have a good understanding of the ecology of the site. We've recorded 13 species of bat, we've got reptiles on the site, breeding birds, and also dormice. And our mitigation and compensation strategy involves doing some quite significant enhancements to the Forestry England site to the north, which is Havant Thicket, and also doing some enhancements to the south in areas of land that we own. One of the key things that we want to deliver, and this is a really exciting bit of the project for me, is the delivery of a new wetland. The plan is to have an area of wetland along the northern edge of the reservoir. So this will be approximately 1 kilometre long. What we're going to have is a retaining bund which will separate the sort of main water body from this wetland, and then we're going to create 4 different wetland compartments which will provide the different range of habitats for different species. There are 4 areas of woodland on the site. We've looked at various options as to how we might save those areas of woodland, because through the consultation process with our partners, which include Forestry England, Natural England, Environment Agency, and the Hampshire Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, we talked about whether or not it'd be possible to provide 3 or 2 smaller reservoirs rather than 1 large water body, and try and save the avenue. But unfortunately, there are 2 reasons why that can't happen. One is the best clay is located underneath the avenue, and the second is that if you did that, you then end up in a situation where you don't have enough water to address the needs for the future, for water supply for the future. The site is going to change, as we said. So what we're looking at doing is doing some extensive work to improve the quality of the woodlands in Havant Thicket to the north. And then we've also set up a grant scheme, and that capital grant scheme will provide some funding for conservation projects. So we're looking at identifying suitable sites where we would fund the planting of trees in those areas.
So Trevor Codling there with the first part of our focus on the environment and the reservoir project. We'll get to the second half with Liz in just a second. Just a reminder, all the videos you see today, they're available via our website. If you just Google Havant Thicket Reservoir consultation, it will bring up the website. You can also access them via our Facebook page as well, at Havant Reservoir. And there's lots of information as well on that website, including you can download the consultation booklet. If you want to, we can send you a printed copy of the booklet and feedback form as well. Again, details available on the website, and the recordings of all these webinars will be available as well. So if you've got friends, family, colleagues who couldn't make today's session or the final one that we're running tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock, they can access the recordings again via that website, portsmouthwater.co.uk/Havant-Thicket-Reservoir. Lots of questions coming in about the environmental aspects of the scheme. We'll get to those very shortly. First of all, another video with one of Trevor's colleagues, Liz Brown, about the assessment we're doing to ensure the environment is protected and enhanced.
Hello, I'm Liz Brown. I'm the Havant Thicket Reservoir Project's Environmental Assessment and Design Lead. Havant Thicket Reservoir is going to create a valuable new wetland, woodland, parkland habitats, a visitor centre with parking facilities and a network of trails and paths. We have to take into consideration the impacts of any construction on the surrounding environment. So what we've been doing is we've been carrying out an environmental impact assessment for the scheme. This assessment identifies the environmental effects of the project and develops mitigation to avoid, reduce or offset these environmental effects. The assessment approach, our methodologies, have all been discussed and agreed with the local authority, East Hampshire District Council and Havant Borough Council. The environmental assessment includes inputs from a number of environmental topics. These include air quality, biodiversity, historic environment, landscape and changes in view, noise and vibration, population and health, transport and water, and that's in relation to water quality, water resources and flood risk. We've undertaken a number of surveys and studies. Most importantly, Portsmouth Water anticipated that a lot of survey work in terms of biodiversity would need to be done. But this means that surveys have been undertaken recently and reported on in terms of European protected species, but other habitats as well. In addition, we've done a ground investigation, which is informing the assessments about ground conditions and the amount of material that might be generated on site, which can be used during construction. And we've also been doing traffic surveys to ascertain traffic numbers in the local areas to inform our assessment. The advantage of having this baseline information means that we have up-to-date current information, and then we can then consider the changes that might happen as a result of the project. As our design develops further, we will be developing a detailed environmental plan for construction. Now, this is for both the pipeline and the main reservoir itself. We prepare an outline of this as part of the planning application. This will indicate how we will keep any impacts, such as noise from traffic or construction activities, to a minimum as we are working. This plan will be agreed in advance with the relevant local authorities, and the measures it includes will be applied throughout the construction For example, a traffic management plan will help reduce disruptions such as restricting construction traffic to certain routes and times of the day.
So an update on the environmental benefits of the reservoir scheme there. A reminder, we've still got the reservoir and leisure and the benefits it will deliver to come on that particular topic. We'll also look at the access route options for the reservoir, both during construction and once the project is completed, when visitors will be using the site. And also we'll be looking at the routes for the new pipeline that needs to go in to take water up to the reservoir in the first place and bring it back out for supply to customers in due course. Let's focus back on the environment though. We've got Trevor Codlin, our principal ecologist, who you heard from a short time ago in the first of our films on the environment, and Simon Hughes is back. And Simon, if I could start with you, we've had quite a few questions in about the ancient woodland issue, because there's woodland on the site. The site's going to change and that woodland won't be there anymore. So Stephanie's written in, she says, why is it essential to destroy 14 hectares of ancient woodland in order to construct the reservoir? Why can't the design work around the woodland, or perhaps make the reservoir a little bit smaller so the woodland can be accommodated on the site?
Yeah, no, really, really good questions, and questions that have been plaguing us for a long time. So probably worth telling the story about how we came to choose the site, which I think sort of then outlines sort of why we got to the position we're in. So several years ago, when the proposal to develop the reservoir was in its infancy, the Portsmouth Water went through a process of assessing a whole range of different sites that would be suitable, and looked at over 70 different locations, from far to the west of Portsmouth all the way across to the east of Chichester. And there are a number of criteria that are looked at in terms of what would be a good site, and that was around was the geology suitable? Was there any development going on around the site, and was there water in the proximity that would be available to then go into the reservoir to be stored? Because water is really heavy stuff and it's very carbon intensive and energy intensive to pump it around. So the assessment of those 70 plus sites boiled down to 5 principally around the Havant area. And of those 5 were then taken forward for sort of really detailed assessment on the environment, their environmental impact, their social impact, the economic impact, and whether or not it was feasible to engineer a reservoir on that site. The Havant Thicket site was then chosen as the preferred option. And I think, as Bill said in his short video, it's the perfect site for a reservoir. It's got really good geology, which means that we don't have to import material onto site, which again means that it can be delivered in a really carbon efficient way. So we looked at the site and we understood, clearly there are 3 to 4 blocks of ancient woodland on there. We looked at all the different designs that we could make, and there were 8 different detailed design options reviewed to try and protect as much of the ancient woodland as we could. For the reservoir to meet its need, which is to deliver over 20 million litres a day into supply, such that it can be transferred across to protect those really important habitats in the chalk streams of the Test and Itchen, it needs to be a certain minimum size. And that's the 8,700 million litres of usable volume that we created. The only way to create that volume on that site with that geology and in that location is the design that you see today. Now, what we have been able to do is alter the layout of the embankment slightly on the sort of southeastern edge, and alter the embankment on the western edge as well to reduce its impact on ancient woodland a little bit. So we have been able to modify the design slightly to reduce it. But this is a long story, sorry, but it is a long process to get to this point. And throughout that process, the aim has been to aim to reduce the impact on the environment, not just the ancient woodland, but all the other environments that are important there as well.
So there's been a couple of follow-up questions linked to that. I think Trevor mentioned it in his video. Stephanie and Anne have been in touch. They've picked up on the information in Trevor's video, which I think they've watched on the website, about the fact that under the avenue, that middle strip of woodland that people saw on the map, that there's clay there that can be used to build the reservoir. So given the issues around the amount of water that the reservoir ultimately needs to hold, is the clay issue, and whether it's taken from under the avenue or brought in, less of a point, because in essence, you still need to have a reservoir that is as big as we want to build to get that 8.7 billion litre capacity?
Sorry, are you asking Trevor or myself that?
I was going to put it to you, Simon, sorry.
Okay, sorry, my misunderstanding. So the issue is that if we can access the clay under the avenue, then that delivers two things. One is it means we can have the size of reservoir that we need to be meaningful to protect those other environments and the chalk streams. And the second is we don't have to import material, and that has a really significant impact, not just on the carbon budget of the project, but also on the roads and the communities around, the amount of traffic that will cause. This is an environmental conundrum. I make no bones about it. There are hugely internationally important chalk streams, Test and Itchen, that need to be protected from the impacts of abstraction during drought, and this reservoir will help protect those really important environments. And we've got to be able to demonstrate that passes what's called the wholly exceptional needs test, and we think we can.
Okay. Well,
sorry, can I just add in on
Sure.
that as well, Joel? I mean, if you think about the design of the reservoir as it is, and in Bill's video he mentioned that in places the reservoir will be 18 meters deep, and if you were to try and build two smaller reservoirs, you would have to build embankments either side of the avenue to protect the avenue. So the avenue would essentially become it would be in a deep valley either side of two very large embankments. So there's actually three things that would happen here. The woodlands just wouldn't function. They'd get flooded. They'd be, it just wouldn't be a healthy woodland. So whilst I mentioned the two things in my video, there is that third issue as well. So you wouldn't get enough water. You wouldn't be able to access that clay, and you would have to build these two embankments either side of the avenue, which would be the height of the trees as they are at the moment, essentially.
Okay, thanks for that, Trevor. I've got a question for you that's coming from John. So he says, you admit that some ancient forests will be destroyed or damaged. How will you compensate for this loss? And will you increase the overall number of trees in the locality? So can you talk about that?
Yeah, so what I mean, the numbers game is a big game, and honestly, I don't want to get tied up too much into numbers, but rather the sort of area of the woodland, because what we don't want to achieve is just a woodland plantation. What we want to try and do is create some new woodland that will be a really good habitat in the future for wildlife. So the first things we're going to do is, well, as Simon's already said, we're going to protect some of the woodlands on site. Now, admittedly, that's only a small amount, a small percentage of the woodland that's on site. The Corsican pine plantation in the extreme north of the site, that part of the woodland is actually going to fall within our wetland area. So what we're going to do is restore that to a priority habitat, which is wet woodland. So essentially along the northern edge of the reservoir, what you would have is an area of wet grassland in the extreme west. In the next compartment, which we call compartment 1, would be reed bed. Then we would have this wet woodland habitat. And then the next two compartments to the east and up near the visitor centre would be your more sort of traditional wetland type habitats. We're then looking at doing, we've been talking very closely to Forestry England throughout this process, and we're looking at around about 50 hectares of enhancements within Havant Thicket. So that would be sort of removing it from traditional sort of forestry workings and create sort of woodland rides, more sort of broadleaf, deciduous woodland clearings. So again, habitat which is much more sort of beneficial to species. And we've done quite a lot of survey work in there to demonstrate what we're proposing to do would be beneficial for species by doing that. And then finally, we're actually talking to a number of different stakeholders about creating new woodland, and the sums we're looking at is something in the region of 50 to 70 hectares of new woodland. Obviously in the south, land is really expensive. So we're looking at sort of working in partnership with other organisations to try and come up with pieces of land that large to create. And again, what we don't want to do is end up with loads of trees planted to fulfill certain numbers that are all in plastic tubes. So what we find quite exciting is maybe to do it, let it naturally develop. So you would plant some standard trees, but have this woodland creation where it naturally develops into something, you know, that doesn't look like a wood plantation. So that's the sort of vision at the moment.
And Liz has got in touch with a question, just to paraphrase Liz slightly, and either of you can take this one. She's talking about the fact, to be clear, that with ancient woodland, it's not a case of replacing it because it's been there for centuries and it would take centuries to grow again. So I guess it's to be clear about that point. It's not about replacing like for like. It's about addressing that environmental equation that you talked about, Simon, of the pros and the cons around the wider issues and the local issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I mean, let's be clear, as I say, we've explored every single opportunity to try and avoid the impact on the ancient woodland. At this site it's not feasible. You know, there's no other sites in the area that we can build this reservoir. So, and yeah, I totally accept we're not replacing the ancient woodland, which is why I'm very clear that we're creating ancient woodland. So we're enhancing the woodlands to the north in Havant Thicket, but then we're going to be creating new woodland. So not creating ancient woodland, but just new woodland, which in time will become a very special habitat in its own type, in its own right. And that's what we're looking to try and achieve.
Okay, another
Joel,
go
if
ahead,
I
Simon.
could just add to that, thanks, Joel. Sorry to butt in like that, everyone. I think also, you know, I talked about the sort of environmental conundrum and sort of weighing off woodland versus river habitats. I think also worth mentioning two things. One is the asset life of the reservoir is in the hundreds of years. So once built, this thing will be there for a very long time, and it will allow the wetland area that's deliberately being designed to be a large proportion of the northern shore to develop into something really incredibly special as a habitat that can offer some huge benefits to all types of different species, including protected species in that area. And it's quite a rare habitat in the south of England now as well. So whilst I absolutely understand that, you know, there isn't a top trumps of wetland trumps, woodland trumps, chalk streams, the part of the intent of the reservoir project is to build something that will be a really wonderful habitat and is able to evolve and develop and grow in value over time.
Okay, a couple of final questions on the environmental aspect of the scheme, and of course any more questions that come in we can pick those up before the end of the webinar. Trevor, a point's been made by Stephanie. She talks about this scheme going on for 9 years, causing disruption. She's particularly concerned about the rare bats that are on site. Can you talk a little bit about the efforts that are being made to transition the site with as little impact on wildlife as possible?
Yeah, so we're working very closely with Natural England on this, and also the local planning authority ecologist. We've got a great team of experts who are really experienced on these protected species. I mean, I think I've mentioned this before, and you get bored with me saying it, but you know, having been the person that found Beckstein's bat back in 2006 on the site, I've got a certain responsibility to protect them. So, so I'm really passionate about making sure that we do some really good stuff for them. So the phasing of the woodland removal is really critical, and so we've actually brought in an expert in mammal ecology who specialises in dormice, and we're talking to him about the best way of removing the trees that would have the least impact on dormice. And let's be fair, it's going to have an impact. It's going, you know, these animals live in a very limited sort of territory, and so we've got to set up and create new territories for these animals. And then what we want to try and do is maintain them in the local area. That is our first option, really. So it's enhancing the habitats in the near area to increase capacity so that these animals can sort of move into those new areas. And that will be a combination of sort of dissuasion through habitat management, and we'll also be capturing them and sort of actively moving them into the local area. Similarly with bats, you know, there's a whole program of sort of tree climbing, survey work, backtracking work. We're going to be doing quite a significant amount of work to make sure we identify as many roosts as we can, which actually, based on all the work we've done so far, have not been that many. We've only found 3 species roosting in the avenue, so out of the 13 we've recorded on the site. So you know, we're committed to doing the right thing here.
Okay, and Simon, last question in this section for you. It's about the Woodland Trust. People may be aware that they've launched a campaign against the loss of the woodland at the Havant Thicket Reservoir site. Trevor mentioned in his video, he's mentioned it in the Q&A here about talking to the likes of Natural England, the Environment Agency, Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. Have you guys been talking to the Woodland Trust at all? Because Liz, who's written the question, is wondering why they've launched the campaign in the first place.
Yeah. So if you're involved with the Woodland Trust, and I am, and I have been for a wee while, you'll know that their role is to do exactly what they're doing. So completely understand why they're launching a campaign, and you know, it's exactly what I would expect. And in fact, we have hosted them on the site. We've taken them around the site in late 2018. We walked through all the blocks of ancient woodland. They were able to see for themselves the condition, and you know, they themselves said, you know, unfortunately these blocks of woodland are in really poor condition, and they were very clear that, you know, their role is to object against any loss of ancient woodland regardless. And so completely understand the position. I think, you know, what we have to be able to demonstrate to meet everyone's requirements is that there is a wholly exceptional circumstance that requires that woodland to be lost, and I think we're able to do that. And alongside that, I think we're able to demonstrate that we can put in place not a replacement scheme, because you can't replace ancient woodland, but a scheme that will more than, you know, substantially more than the amount is lost, will replace a lot of new woodland, and it'll be high value woodland, lowland deciduous woodland, which is a priority 1 habitat.
And I guess it's worth reminding everybody, the consultation we're running at the moment, the feedback we get from that helps shapes the planning application that goes into the local councils. And then there's, as is standard with any planning application, there'll be a publication consultation process around that before the council's committee make a decision.
Absolutely, that's correct, yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks for the focus on the environment, guys. Plenty more questions to get through before the webinar finishes. If your question hasn't been answered, don't worry, we will get through it before we close today. And if you want to post or signpost this webinar to your friends, your family, your colleagues, we've got our final one tomorrow at 6 o'clock, which you'd still sign up for. And all the recordings of the webinars are available on our website, portsmouthwater.co.uk/Havant-Thicket-Reservoir. So moving from the environment into the leisure benefits that the reservoir will deliver, let's hear from our colleague, Jamie Metcalf.
I'm Jamie Metcalf, and I'm the Havant Thicket landscape architect. I am tasked with designing the external spaces at Havant Thicket in order to create somewhere special for everyone to use. For the local people, Havant Thicket Reservoir will create an exciting new leisure facility and wildlife conservation area for local communities on their doorstep. We want to provide a place for people of all ages to stay healthy, learn more about water and nature, and to get together as a community. We also want to support local wildlife to thrive. So we've worked closely with the local community to understand people's views and develop proposals that reflect these. We're also working closely with our neighbours at Staunton Country Park and Forestry England's Havant Thicket site to make sure our plans work together and support each other. This is our overall plan, which is shaping our proposals. It includes a new wetland habitat on the reservoir's northern edge that's discussed in detail in our video on the reservoir and the environment. Our plan also includes a visitor centre with cafe, shop, community and education spaces, parking facilities, play and picnic areas, and a network of trails for walkers, cyclists and horse riders. So on the site, the visitor centre will be set in the landscaped area, with parking, play areas and picnic sites connecting visitors with the wetland and the surrounding woodland. A wetland boardwalk will run from outside the visitor centre to the nearby bird hide. This will be amongst reeds next to the water, which will encourage visitors to get closer to wildlife on the site and learn more about it. A network of nature trails will lead from the centre for walkers, joggers, cyclists and horse riders. The plan is to replace the existing bridleway with a 5-kilometre circuit around the site with access points for people living nearby. A shorter 1-kilometre trail through the woodland will provide an alternative for visitors who want to stay closer to the cafe and car park. Benches, bins, viewing areas and information boards will also be located all around the reservoir. We've been working closely with local councils, environmental groups and other companies who manage similar sites to explore ways to create a great place for visitors, as well as a peaceful home for the wildlife. We've also been talking to local communities, walking groups and cycling and horse riding representatives to understand all your needs. We plan to provide parking for just under 200 cars in the northwest corner next to the visitor centre. There will also be an extra 75 spaces in an overflow car park with occasional use. We want the car park to have a natural feel with native trees and shrubs and paths leading to the woodland. This will also make it easier for wildlife to travel through the car park area. The car parking will also include spaces for staff, disabled visitors and coaches, as well as cycle racks, and near the time we'll look at how many electric charging points we'll need. The overall parking space numbers are based on the amount of people we expect to drive to the site. They were worked out in a review carried out last year by a company which specialises in public attractions. Based on the medium level of activities we plan to offer. If we offered more activities, we would need to plan for more visitors to the site. There will be charges for car parking, and these will be set in consultation with Hampshire County Council to make sure they align with charges at other nearby sites such as Staunton Country Park and the Forestry England's Havant Thicket Woodland, so that car parks can support each other. We'll be encouraging as many visitors as possible to leave their cars at home and walk and cycle to the reservoir, as well as make use of local transport like buses and trains. We want to work with local authorities and travel companies to integrate the reservoir into the local public transport network.
So an update on the leisure offering that's potentially in the pipeline for the reservoir site there from Jamie Metcalf. You got a glimpse of it a little while ago, the draft design for the visitor centre there at the reservoir site. We'll hear about that very shortly from our colleague Kieran Dyer. Just a reminder though that all the videos you're seeing today are available via our Facebook page at Havant Reservoir, also available on our website. If you just Google Havant Thicket Reservoir consultation, it will bring up that site. And as well as the videos there, you've got our online feedback survey that you can fill in, and you can signpost to your friends, your family and your colleagues as well. And one of the really cool features of the website is for the leisure page, we've got an ideas board. So if you've got any thoughts, ideas, suggestions for stuff that we could include on the leisure side of things, you can put your ideas up there, and ditto for the visitor centre as well. Let's hear more about that now. Here's Kieran Dyer, the man who's in charge of that design.
I'm Kieran Dyer. I'm the architectural lead for the Havant Thicket Reservoir project, and my main remit is to look after the buildings that are part of the reservoir development, mainly the visitor centre and the public realm. The visitor centre is such an exciting part of the overall scheme. Really, it's going to be the public face, the touch points that the public are going to come and see about the reservoir and the development. It has to blend into the natural landscape of the reservoir and the wetlands. We're looking to maintain that rural character, particularly for the use of sort of natural materials to connect people with water. So we're looking at a waterfront location for the visitor centre to really provide that experience and connection for visitors. So the visitor centre is going to have several facilities, the key one being the reception area, where visitors will be able to get information about the water, wildlife and activities that's happening around the whole reservoir. There will also be a large open plan cafe which will have panoramic windows which will give you views across to the wetlands and the different habitats. There's going to be an external terrace as well, which will be just off the cafe. That will have some overflow for another 50 people. There's also going to be a small little shop which will sell local products and artwork. There's also going to be an education and community space. You know, it's going to be a nice flexible area with a separate outdoor space, cloakroom and toilets as well. And really we need to provide sufficient space for staff and volunteers, so there's going to be an office and break room for them as well. The visitor centre has to be designed for a broad range of people. We're looking at accessible users, dog walkers, cyclists, runners, family groups and community groups. So really the visitor centre has to suit all their needs, and that's our challenge. We'll work up the plans to the outline planning permission. Following that, we will work with local stakeholders and community groups to develop the designs further into something more detailed.
So the visitor centre design there, something that's attracted a lot of attention. A lot of people like it, and a lot of ideas coming in via the website for things that could go on at the visitor centre and things we can consider as we get closer to construction in a few years' time. We hear from Jamie Metcalf, who you heard from a little while ago, about the overall leisure offering at the website, and Simon Hughes is back once again. Simon, if I can start with a question to you from Leslie. So she's hit the Q&A tool at the bottom of her screen and typed this in. And Leslie says, I'm a local open water swim coach. In the future, would there be an opportunity to use the reservoir for swimming? Open water swimming is growing in popularity year on year, and this would be an ideal site.
Hi, Leslie. Thanks for your question. You have my huge admiration. I'm not brave enough to be an open water swimmer. So this is going to be quite a hard-working site. It's got to do a number of things. First thing is it's an operational reservoir. It's cold water. It's deep. It will be there will be a circulation system in place which will turn the water over at short notice with no warning. The site's also got to be a place where people can go and quietly reflect and enjoy the countryside, much as people who go on the site do now already. And it's going to be working really hard to be a tranquil nature conservation area. So our judgment at the moment is that we wouldn't promote wild swimming or boating on the reservoir in order to make sure that all those other objectives could be readily met. It's something we'll keep under review and never say never. But right now the plan is to try and keep the body of the reservoir free for the sort of quiet enjoyment of the countryside and for nature to take over.
And the other thing we always get asked quite a bit about is fishing at the reservoir site. Can you just tell us what the position is on that currently?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of interest in fishing on the site, as you can imagine, and we've been talking to some friends at the Angling Trust who develop and advise on the development of fisheries on these types of site. They think that there may be opportunities for fishing there, particularly trout fishing and maybe predator fishing, so perch and pike. And they think that they can come up with an option that allows that to happen from the bank only, in a way that doesn't compromise those other needs that we need the reservoir to meet. So we're in conversation and we'll be looking very seriously at their proposals.
Okay, and Jamie, a question to you from Leslie, not the same Leslie as we've just heard from. And this Leslie says, I live on the other side of the A3M, exactly 1 mile from the site, and train there every day for both running and cycling. And Leslie asks, will we still have access to the site during construction?
Yes, thanks, Leslie. So access to the site will be managed during construction, and safety is going to be paramount for those. What we have with the bridleway access that's currently there is we're going to have a temporary diversion running around through the Havant Thicket forestry area.
Okay, that's great. And I've also got another question for you, Simon, just around the issues with managing water levels, because obviously, depending on the weather, the water levels in the reservoir may vary. There's obviously the wetland to consider, and perhaps the fact the reservoir might only be partially full for extended periods of time. Can you talk about how that's going to be managed? Because this particular person, I think it's John who's written in, is concerned about the impact on leisure and safety for people as well.
Yeah, hi John, thanks. You've obviously seen similar sorts of things happen in other reservoirs around the south. So if I just touch on the wetland first. So we use the term bunded wetland now. That might not mean anything to most of us. What that means is that regardless of the level of the reservoir, there will always be an amount of water in that wetland area because it's separated by a big clay wall from the rest of the water in the main body of the reservoir. Now that's brilliant for a number of reasons. The main one being is that there's always water there for the environment and the ecosystems that are built up there. It also means that it will always look broadly the same, so it won't change that much. Now, what Jim alluded to in his video and in questions is that actually the reservoir is intended to be used as a drought storage source. So that means that the water in the reservoir will tend to be called on only in the very driest times. And that could be as rarely as sort of once every 20 years or so. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be some changes in water level, but the expectation is this will be a pretty stable source of water that will be fairly constant in its level if it's used in the way that we're planning to use it. Which is to put an additional resource into the system when it's really, really dry.
Okay, and then another question for you, Simon, from Jason, who's picked up on the update you gave around things like fishing and swimming and water sports. Jason says, you say you won't promote swimming and boating. What will be done to stop this, though? And if it does happen, what precautions have you got in place?
Yeah, hi, Jason. Good point. So the site will be so all the public rights of way across the site will be maintained. So there'll be public access to large areas of the site. Any kind of operational areas where there's a risk of people getting access to or damaging equipment access will be very, very closely controlled and prohibited. And the rest of the site will be staffed during normal hours, and vehicle access will be controlled through the access routes as well, to normal sort of working operating hours. Now, okay, we've all been teenagers. We've all gone and jumped in the river in the summer and so on. And we fully expect that there will be some impromptu swimming and possibly boating. I think that'll be much more challenging. We'll be on site to monitor that and make sure that people don't put themselves in danger. Are aware of the dangers and are very strongly discouraged from going into the water or going onto the water in their boats and in their speedos.
Yep, and I know that Portsmouth Water is a supporter of a water industry-wide campaign around reservoir safety and getting that education out there to people to make sure they know of the dangers and that they shouldn't go in the water in the first place. So I'm sure that the reservoir will be part of that. Jamie, final question to you for this section. It's coming from Nick, who says, what's planned for the existing Havant Thicket car park at Rowlands Castle?
Hi, Nick. So this car park is going to remain unchanged. So we're going to have our new car park in the kind of northwest corner next to the visitor centre. And then we're going to be working closely with Forestry England and Staunton Country Park to make sure that they all run smoothly.
Okay, thanks to Jamie and Simon for now. If you've got any questions on leisure, do hit the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and send us them before the end of the webinar. We'll try and answer all the questions as best we can before we wrap up today. The recording of this webinar will be available on the website in a day or so's time, portsmouthwater.co.uk/Havant-Thicket-Reservoir. So we've got two more areas to cover off. Coming up, we'll talk about the pipeline that's needed to get water to the reservoir and back out again when it goes into supply. We'll get to that in just a sec. First of all, let's hear from our colleague Andy Hills about the access options for the reservoir.
Hello, my name's Andy Hills. I'm the senior engineer on the reservoir project who's been leading work on the options for the access route to and from the site. We need to create a public road for vehicles to get in and out of the reservoir site. That's both whilst the reservoir is being built and when it opens to the public. Options for the access road were last looked at back in 2006 to 2008. Since then, the local area has changed, so we think it's important to look at all the options again. There's more development to the southwest of the site, and there's planning permission for a residential and mixed-use development just to the north of the site. These and other plans for development mean there are new challenges and opportunities to consider. We've carried out another review of all the options and will continue to review and develop new ones. Each option was assessed in terms of impact on the environment, engineering and construction, and how it fits into the overall aims of the project. Our review has shown that there are now 2 potential access points to the reservoir, from the north and from the south. A number of routes from the north were considered during the public consultation in 2008. The preferred one came from the A3M Junction 2 via the B2149. At this time, this was supported by most people because it was close to A3M and avoided residential areas in Warren Park and Rowlands Castle. From the B2149, 200 metres new access track will be needed through woodland, and then the road would continue on an existing Forestry England track in Havant Thicket to reach the reservoir. There were and still are concerns about the impact of more traffic on the B2149. As we've studied the reservoir in more detail over the past few months, we've been able to make changes to the design of the embankment, and this has created more space on the southwest side of the site. This has enabled a southern option to be developed. We can now build the embankment, a southern access route, and a separate path for walkers, cyclists and others. This means we can create an access point from the south, either instead of or in addition to a northern one. This access point would come off Swanmore Road and follow a new road on the site along the west side of the reservoir and up to the car park and visitor centre. We're considering what routes may be available for construction, vehicles and visitors to reach this access point, whilst creating as little impact on the local roads as possible. We're continuing to develop and assess these 2 access options and are having ongoing conversation with landowners on the routes and the Highway Authority to see what is possible. We think this is an important time to hear your views and those of local councillors, environmental groups and other interested organisations. So please let us know what you think. We could even consider developing 2 access points, one from the north and the south.
So the detail there on the access route options as they stand for the reservoir project. And a reminder, if you go to our website, just Google Havant Thicket Reservoir Consultation, you go to the page that talks about getting to and from the reservoir, and there's a very useful map there where you can place a pin on the map, a virtual pin, a digital pin with your comments on. And since we posted some information about the access route options on Facebook in recent days, that page has got lots of pins on it with people having their say on that. So we've got a little bit of a question answer session on this with our colleagues Andy Hills and Joe Farrer as well. Andy, if I could just start with the first question to you. It's coming from Nick again. Why can't the access point be off Rowlands Castle roundabout? That would involve far less disturbance of sensitive habitats. So I know you looked at a number of options. Is that something that was considered?
Yes, it was. I think overall we looked at 11 potential options providing access into the site for both construction stroke operational traffic. And the roundabout at Rowlands Castle, as you are fully aware, is a double dumbbell roundabout, and to be able to modify that and make it effective and efficient would involve the entire modelling of that junction to make it work and effective, which would cause a lot of disruption and in practical terms and cost and impact, it was considered unacceptable.
Okay, and then there's been a further comment that's come in from John. It's quite a long comment, so I'll try and paraphrase it. The suggestion of providing a vehicular access via Warren Park Estate appears unwise, as this will increase traffic on congested residential roads, many of which are protected by traffic calming, because there'll be problems with rat running and excessive speed in John's view. The alternative access via the B2149 is a far safer route, being close to a motorway junction. It's currently a narrow country road, but could easily be improved to give safe, direct access. The Warren Park access would be perfect for non-vehicular traffic. Do you really think you can make the Warren Park access safe without dangerously increasing traffic across Lee Park Estate? So I guess John is basically saying there that he prefers the northern option, but even then he still wants to make sure that Warren Park and Lee Park is not affected.
Okay, I'll do my best. There's quite a few questions in that one, so I'll do my best. Just to give you a bit of brief background, we went through an exercise and looked at the multiplicity of options for the routes, and two, as mentioned in the video, were identified as favourite ones. The northern one, the main disadvantage of that one with loss of ancient woodland, and as the speaker has mentioned, you would have an impact on residential traffic to the south. Now, that's if we consider it as an either or, but one of the options we've been looking at is to potentially use both at the same time. And with that approach, we could sort of, by and large, mostly limit construction traffic to come in from the north and come down through the northern option to and from the site. There will be a degree of construction traffic which would need to access it from the south on the corner of Swanmore Road has been identified. But that will be by and large greatly limited compared to what construction traffic would use the northern route. So that in part will save the impact on Swanmore Road, Warren Park, Lee Park areas. Now if we move on to visitor traffic, we have done some studies and evaluation of visitors numbers, and we would expect if we had two accesses, we would be able to sort of dilute the impact of traffic approaching the site. And if we did, what we would probably adopt is a method of signing it for members of the public from the north and just have an access to the south on Swanmore Road, but that wouldn't be signposted as such. So it would only be local people. And to sort of address the issue of safety, as you're fully aware, there's quite a significant level of traffic calming in Lee Park, Warren Park, and there is even traffic calming at the southern end of Swanmore Road. So we'd look to extend the impact of that traffic calming by extending up through the Swanmore area, Swanmore Road area, going down to Coleshot area, road area as well. So that would help improve the safety. Also, going back to the point that the question asked was about other forms of access. There is a bus stop, which we would see as a potential good link in for people arriving by bus, public transport. And there's a master plan for a given access, pedestrian and cycle access from other points of the compass that's been developed by Jamie and his team.
Okay, look at the comments that have come in on Facebook about the access route options. You talk about the combination of the northern and southern route options. How would you safeguard against rat running if people wanted to use it as a shortcut to get either way and cut out a bit of traffic through Rowlands Castle or via Lee Park?
Okay, it's a fair question. At the moment, Simon Hughes has already mentioned that we'd be looking to have a gated access out of open hours, so that should in theory stop a lot of the traffic. In terms of rat running traffic when it's operational, the access road to the north will be a single lane, single carriageway with passing bays, which would have quite a dramatic increase in reducing speeds and throughput through that access. And we would have the residential street and traffic coming to the south, which would already have to pass through a fair degree of traffic calm streets to be able to use it as a small rat run in between. So in terms of appeal, I think it should be by these measures, it would be the appeal of it as a rat run would be reduced.
Okay, and Joe, just a quick question to you. I had a couple of questions in, or a couple of points in from Jennifer. She's concerned about the impact both during construction with the traffic there and in the longer term with visitors. In terms of all the detail that will go into the planning application, because the purpose of the consultation we're running at the moment is to put our proposals out there, get feedback on them. That will help shape the planning application. Presumably, the full detail will be available publicly via the planning application, whether it's the access route options, the route for the pipeline, the ecological survey information that's going into all the environmental assessments.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be looking carefully at people's reactions to the north and south access. The transport assessment will be assessing the impacts of the preferred option, and that report will be part of the documents that will be submitted with the plan application, along with the environmental statement and all the other environmental reports that we've used and that we're reporting on. And I think it's fair to say that the access option is obviously something that's taken up a lot of our time and thought in looking at this. We've got to be very careful to balance the potential impact on ancient woodland from the northern access with the potential impact on the local residents to the south. What we're talking about for visitors traffic, about 30, we estimate about 30 vehicles at the busiest time, which would be late morning, so it doesn't coincide with commuter traffic. And if we can dilute that, those sorts of numbers between the north and south, it would obviously have quite a big impact in terms of minimising that traffic. And obviously people can still access through Staunton Country Park and from the Forestry England side as well at Rowlands Castle. So we are looking very carefully at, and also with construction, how to stagger activities, use alternate routes, and minimise disruption that way. But yes, all that information will be in the planning application.
So, and I guess in terms of the construction, it's worth going back to the discussion we were having with Trevor and Simon about the fact that the clay that's needed to build the reservoir embankment and line the reservoir, that's on site. So that should minimise any HGV type movements coming in and out of the site, because a lot of the stuff that's on there won't need to be delivered. It's already there for the diggers to move around.
Absolutely, and that was one of the main reasons for that, and that will minimise the traffic. Also with the pipeline, we very carefully designed the pipeline route to try and avoid local roads as much as possible to minimise the traffic disruption there. So you'll see the pipeline is quite a zigzaggedy route, and that's the reason for it. It's been very carefully designed to minimise disruption as much as possible. So yes, through the design, we're trying to minimise that disruption, and then during the construction activity, we'll have further measures in place to minimise that further.
Okay, and if you go to the website, it's entitled Getting to and from the Reservoir. There is an infographic there that tells you about the expected levels of traffic, both during construction and once the reservoir is open to visitors. So it gives you a better idea of the number of vehicle movements that are expected on a daily basis and when they would typically be. Also as well, you can drop your comments onto that digital map, a virtual pin, make your comments there, and it'll all be taken into account as part of the feedback we consider the planning applications that will go in a few weeks, a few months' time later this year to the local council. So Joe mentioned the pipeline route for the pipeline that's needed to get water to the reservoir in the first place and take it back out for supply to customers in due course. Let's hear from Bill Irvine about the proposals for that.
Hello, my name's Bill Irvine. I'm lead design engineer on the Havant Thicket project. My role on the project is to coordinate all of the design elements across the project, including the reservoir itself, the pipeline, the pumping station, and downstream treatment works and connections into the network, providing water across the Southern Waters region. We need to lay a pipeline to fill the reservoir in the winter from Bedhampton Springs and to take water out to supply it to you when it's needed. The same pipeline could also be used to steadily draw off water into the Hermitage stream in the unlikely event we need to empty the reservoir. During the 2008 consultation, we heard support for a pipeline route that followed the Riders Lane and Hermitage Stream corridors. Since then, we've had a look in more detail at how we could lay the pipe along this route and the disruption it might cause. We've also considered new ways of laying pipe. We've looked at the engineering and how difficult it would be to build, disruption to the local community and traffic, the health, safety and well-being of the people building the pipeline and maintaining it in the future, environmental effects and sustainability, and the overall cost. As a result of this, we've slightly updated the pipeline route, which you can see in outline on this map. This route minimises the impact on communities, environmentally sensitive areas, and areas of open space with trees and grass. These would be restored after the pipe is in place. Most of the pipe will be installed using an open cut method, where we dig down from the road or land, lay the pipe, and then fill in the ground above it. In some places, we would tunnel underground using a pipe jacking method to push the pipe into place underground from one open cut hole, for example, under the railway line. Where we cross the Riders Lane and Hermitage streams, we can also take the opportunity to improve these watercourses. We plan the work so it can be carried out as quickly as possible and cause as little disruption to as few people as possible. Our proposals for the pipeline will be submitted as part of the wider planning application for the reservoir to Havant Borough Council and East Hampshire District Council later this year. The pipeline section will be an outline proposal and, if it's supported, we'll submit a detailed planning application with more information on construction and traffic management later on. For the detailed plans, we'll be looking at how we can limit the size of the areas we're working in to reduce disruption to footpaths, residents and local roads, stagger site activities to reduce traffic, restrict when work can be carried out, for example, not working overnight, and consider noise insulation measures. We'll speak to you again about these detailed plans to hear what you think.
So the latest from Bill on our proposals for a new pipeline to serve the reservoir. And again, if you go to the website, there's a map where you can zoom in down to property level, just like a Google map where you can zoom right in and see the pipeline route in further detail. And you can post your comments there about things that you're concerned about, questions you've got, or anything you want to add there by sticking a virtual pin in that map, and we'll take all those comments on board. Bill Irvine, who you heard from in the film there, has joined me. And Bill, your colleague Jo mentioned it when we were talking about the access route option. She mentioned the pipeline in passing. But in engineering terms, you just want to go as the crow flies, A to B from Bedhampton Springs up to the reservoir. But in the real world, you've got a lot of considerations, and that's why the pipeline route has been scaled to minimise the disruption to the local community, but also to not affect the local environment, like the streams that it crosses, and importantly, strategic sort of sections like where it goes under the railway line.
Yeah, that's correct. Joel, there's a lot of sort of aspects that we need to consider in terms of the route that the pipe takes. So, yeah, we want to keep the pipe as straight as possible. There's a lot of water that we're pumping up, and obviously that gravitates back down the pipe. So, keeping it as straight as possible sort of avoids sort of impacts of sort of increasing the losses through the system. So it takes more energy to get the water up there. The more bends there are in the pipe, but there's a lot of constraints. You know, we're taking we've got to get the water from Bedhampton pumping station at the springs up to the reservoir, and we've got to feed that through Lee Park and Warren Park. So yeah, we've looked at all the different things that are in the way. So one of the first things we encounter is the railway line. So we're looking at a short tunneling section to get us under there, so we're not interfering with the rail, with the trains and that sort of thing. And equally, Network Rail are going to be looking quite closely at our design to make sure that's not having any effect to their railway. From that point, yeah, we're sort of making our way as directly as possible. We're making use of, I suppose, the corridor that Hermitage Stream and Riders Lane Stream takes. So that's giving us a nice sort of, working our way up those valleys. That gives us the sort of gradients that we need, particularly to bring the water back down when it gravitates from the reservoir. There's a lot of other services in there, so all of the existing power cables, the sewerage networks, other water supply pipes. So we've worked hard to sort of understand as well as we can where those are. And really the next steps in terms of investigations are to go and do some what we call ground penetrating radar. So that's sort of latest available kit to sort of map where the existing services are as well as possible. That'll give us a bit more information. Then we'll be doing some trial holes as well for some of the sort of trickier areas to really give us a bit more confidence of where some of those other services are.
Okay, then a quick question in from Jason. His attention was caught by the phrase pipe jacking. He says, I assume you mean directional drilling, and if so, can more of this be done than open cut, than digging a trench?
Yeah, there's a variety of different what we call trenchless techniques. So yeah, traditionally, I suppose we dig a trench and then we put the pipe in it. But there's a lot of technologies that have evolved and developed over the years to help us sort of do these, install a pipe from a pit without sort of opening a trench to get it in. So directional drilling is one technique that tends to be available up to a certain sort of diameter size. Actually, the sort of diameters that we're looking at are larger than the sort of directional drilling kit can accommodate. So pipe jack is just another technique that we can use. Essentially, you drive the pipe out, and you've got a piece of machinery at the front that digs out the soil in advance of that pipe. Directional drilling, you sort of drill and you pull the pipe through. So this pipe jacking pushes the pipe in.
There we go. Sounds like a program on the Discovery Channel already,
Absolutely.
Bill. Perhaps we should make one.
Go and Google it.
Thanks very much. If we could have all the panel members pop back up on camera and with sound, we've got the final few questions to rattle through, and also as well, we've got a final poll just to find how you guys have found the webinar in itself, and also whether it's influenced your opinion of the project. So we've got a few questions that have come in. I'm not sure if Bob is back with us. I can put the first one to him. Yep, Bob's there. And Bob, we've had a question that's come in from Rich Fairweather. He says, great initiative. Will our water costs reduce if you're able to sell excess water to other water companies such as Southern Water?
Well, I'm not sure about reducing. I mean, Portsmouth Water Company customers already pay by far the lowest water charges in the country, so they're already at a low level. But one of the main concepts of this project is that because the basis of the reservoir is to export water to Southern Water, then Portsmouth Water customers do not have to pay for the cost of the reservoir. That's Portsmouth water customers. It's Southern Water's water customers who will be paying for that. But I mean, I think, as I said, I think it's already a pretty good value for money package from us. We feel we deliver the cheapest water in the country by some distance, and we are leading the industry in terms of the services that we provide. So hopefully you'll agree that that's pretty good.
Okay, and a couple of questions that have come in from Anne that we didn't cover off before for Trevor, perhaps. So Anne wants to know a couple of things, Trevor. What conditions have Natural England placed on this proposal? I know you mentioned you've had lots of discussions with Natural England around all the environmental side of the project.
Well, at this moment in time, they haven't placed any conditions because we haven't obviously submitted a formal planning application, but we've been working very closely with them throughout, and we've been very fortunate to have sort of a good rapport with them. So we've been discussing some of the issues openly with them, and so they've provided us with some guidance, but at this moment in time we haven't had like a formal response, because obviously that will come in when we submit the planning application, and at that point there will potentially be conditions, and that will relate to sort of timings of vegetation removal and things like that.
Okay, and Anne's other point is around all the ecological surveys. She's particularly interested in bats, so that the information you gave around Bechstein bats in particular, I think would have been helpful to her, but she wants to see the detail of the surveys. Is that something that is going to be made public in due course?
Yeah, the surveys will all be available again through the planning application. So once all the documents are finalised, we've been continuing to survey the site. So we've been doing certain sort of targeted surveys throughout 2019 and 20. We updated the bat radio tracking work on Bechsteins in 2018. So, I think this is probably one of the most surveyed sites in the country from an ecological point of view. We have a really good understanding of what's going on. We've still been monitoring Bechsteins in the wider area. So, the work we did in 2018 focused not only on the site, but also, within a 3-kilometre radius of the site, as we did previously. And I think I saw mention, was it Anne who asked about bat boxes and how they would benefit Beckstein's bats, and
Yes.
and actually there's an awful lot of work that's gone into Beckstein's bats in areas where they're known to exist, and bat boxes are adopted readily by Beckstein's, including some of these large. They were formerly designed to be hibernation boxes, but they've actually proven to be very popular as maternity roost or to form maternity roost for Beckstein's. So the plan is that in Havant Thicket to the north, actually, because it's a forestry site, there's virtually no mature trees there. So in actual fact, there's a really limited number of roosting opportunities for them. So by putting some of these bigger boxes up, we can, and also combined with our management work, we can actually improve that site quite dramatically for bats.
Okay, a quick question to Andy on the access route options from Jason again. Is it not possible to use the new roundabout in Holbert Road and make an entrance without going through Lee Park, is Jason's point. Andy, I think you're still on mute.
That was one of the options we did look at. As you are aware, there's a kind of section towards the eastern end of the bit where we go through Dunsbury Park, which is a bus-only corridor, and we have had conversations with Hampshire County Council, and we will be unable to get that bus restriction lifted to enable that to be used as an access route through Dunsbury Park.
Okay, and then another point from Jennifer, who says, with putting an access point on Swanmore Road, that's the southern option, are you not subjecting residents to extreme levels of traffic and lots of disruption potentially?
I think we've got to, I'm not dismissing it, but extreme levels, it sounds like hundreds of thousands of vehicles coming past. There will be some traffic for sure. We've talked about earlier about trying to mitigate the levels of traffic coming in through the top. And as I have mentioned earlier, we would be looking to restrict most of the construction traffic as far as practical to northern access. And as Joe has also mentioned, that we would be looking to use potentially 2 axes for operational or visitor traffic, which would further dilute the traffic. She also mentioned figures of a typical weekday arrival peak hour of about 30 vehicles a day, which is not, in my opinion, excessive, but that's just my personal opinion.
Okay, and again, people have a chance to have a look at the
yes.
finalised proposals as part of the planning application and make their comments then. So now is not the last chance. And if you go to the website, that infographic around expected traffic levels, I think, is very helpful for people. Bill, I've had another engineering question in from Jason. He talks about the intake for the reservoir, and he's concerned about the safety of that and whether it could affect people that, even if they weren't supposed to, would be swimming or canoeing in there, and whether the intake, I presume he means the point where the water might come in or go out of the reservoir, is how that would be protected, how low down it would be, whether it would be something that would always be below water level and they could be kept away from.
Sorry, but question from Ben, was it?
From Jason.
Jason, sorry. Yeah, Jason, the intake or the inlet into the reservoir, we've actually got 2 points where water comes in and is taken out from an operational point of view. Both of them are very low level. So certainly the lowest one will never be above water level, and I think the higher one will only appear during very low sort of levels in the reservoir. So it'll be difficult to get down, and I think, as Jim says, a very rare occurrence that would be down at those sort of levels. Other reservoirs do have sort of overflow structures. Perhaps that's the sort of thing that you might be sort of thinking about. For the Havant Thicket Reservoir, we do have an overflow arrangement, but actually that runs down the outside of the reservoir. So we'll have a sort of short weird or weir structure alongside the bank, but then it'll run a sort of cascade down to the stream. So there's no sort of piped arrangements for that.
And in terms of people thinking about the reservoir potentially overflowing, if the water overflows and goes into local streams, is that something that's all been modelled and looked at and discussed with the relevant authorities?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the risk of that is incredibly low. Sorry, the reservoirs, as we've explained, is predominantly filled by pumping up from Bedhampton. So we're fully in control of the vast majority of the flow entering the reservoir. So we'd be able to sort of obviously turn those pumps off before it would reach any sort of worrying level. There is a small contributing area, so sort of rain obviously going onto the reservoir itself, but then a small area to the north as well. But those flows are by far and away sort of smaller than what we're pumping in. So that flood risk has all been analysed. We need to submit that as part of the planning application, so everyone will be able to sort of have a look at that analysis, and we have to pass that by the Environment Agency as well to satisfy them that everything's being developed in a safe and reasonable fashion.
Okay, Simon, a question to you from Anne, who took part in one of our earlier webinars, and I think she misheard something because she is worried about provision for motorised bikes of some kind on the site. I presume that's a no-no in terms of motorbikes. There's an issue with them accessing the site at the moment, but there's nothing of that ilk in the proposals for leisure at the reservoir site.
No, absolutely not. Responsible motorcyclists visiting the site as normal visitors, absolutely fine. Unauthorised motorcycling on site will be clamped down on very, very quickly.
Okay, great. And then Trevor, another question from Anne to you on the environmental side of things. So again, going back to the webinar that she took part in before and what she heard, I had the impression that each department had planned their area of responsibility in great detail. What I'm not sure about is exactly how these will integrate with each other. I'm especially concerned that the habitat interests and the leisure interests will conflict. It was encouraging to hear that you will not make provision for water sports so that wetland fauna is not disturbed. What plans are there to ensure that woodland and scrubland species are undisturbed too by leisure activities on site?
Yeah, so so obviously that will all be pulled together by Liz's team, who are pulling together the environmental statement, and so Liz oversees that and makes sure that everything sort of runs smoothly and in conjunction with everything else. So whilst it might seem that there are different departments working on different parts, it all comes together into one live document with different chapters, and so everybody's working as a team. We have regular catch-up, so we know exactly what everybody else is talking about. We feed into each element of it. So that's not going to happen. It's all hopefully going to work smoothly. Sorry, what was your second question?
Well, I guess it was just Anne's concern was the point about making sure that leisure activities take place on site appropriately, but without disturbing the wildlife that is there at the moment and that will be there in the future.
Yeah, so the site will be manned permanently once the reservoir is built and operational, and so we will have to provide a management plan, which, whilst you don't want a management plan to be particularly prescriptive, because nature has a way of doing things its own way. So we might have some aspirations of what we might want to happen, but it might end up doing something different. So we've got some clear objectives that we want to deliver, and we want to make sure the site is a really special place for wildlife, whilst people are able to enjoy it. So the habitat design and the way that it's managed will be designed in such a way so that if there are really sensitive habitats, then there's certain things you can do which will stop people getting access to them, so that it sort of keeps it as a sensitive sort of sanctuary for wildlife. And those are the sort of actions that would go forward in the future.
Okay, thanks to everyone for their questions, and thanks to the panel members for answering them. Last couple of things before we close the webinar. I've got a poll for you to fill in very shortly. Also have some closing remarks from Portsmouth Water Chief Executive Bob Taylor. Let's launch the poll. So it's really just the bookend of the one you did at the start of the webinar. So did you find this webinar useful? And also your support for the plans for the reservoir project, however you feel about that. So if people want to get voting on that, we'll share the results in due course. Just a reminder, the recording of this webinar, if you think it'd be useful for friends or family or colleagues to view, it's going to be on our website. Just Google Havant Thicket Reservoir Consultation. Go to the consultation webinars page, and all the recordings are on there. And also as well, you can submit your questions and make your comments, fill out our feedback survey as well. So when this webinar ends, and it's closed down, it will automatically be directed towards our online feedback survey. So if you feel in a position to fill that in now, feel you've got enough of an idea to make your responses, please do so. So give people a couple more seconds to fill out the poll, and then we'll finish the polling there. So did you find the webinar useful? So everybody who answered said a resounding yes, so that's great to hear. But if you've got any further feedback on how we could improve it further, then do let us know. We've got our final one tomorrow at 6 o'clock, but given the success and the popularity of them, it may be something we use again in the future as well. And also as well, do you support our plans? Yes, 95% of people support our plans. There's one person there who's not supportive, or rather not sure. But again, whatever your view and whatever your friends and family and colleagues' view, do encourage them to have their say, and they can give their feedback that will shape our planning application. So before we go, Bob, Chief Executive of Portsmouth Water, just wanted to hand over to you for some closing remarks, and again, just reiterate your message to people about the project and the consultation.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much indeed, Joe. Well, finally, thanks everybody for tuning in this afternoon to the webinar. Well, you have obviously found it useful, so I'm really glad we've been effective in terms of your feedback there on the poll. So thanks for that. Your feedback is really important and really valuable to us. So it really is appreciated. And we, as you heard at the beginning, we will be at the end of the consultation feeding back some information to you about how we've taken that on board and what changes that we've made. As I sit out looking out of my window in the office here, I'm sure you will have read reports in the newspapers about extremely warm weather and very high demands for water at the moment, partly because of COVID and partly because of the spell of very hot weather we've had in May. But I think this period that we're going through at the moment just illustrates the challenges that kind of face our industry for ensuring we have plentiful water supplies for the future, and also making sure that we don't damage the environment, which has been the case in the past to some degree with over abstraction. So I'm glad to say that it is actually raining where I'm sitting at the moment. So for me as a water engineer, that's very good news. So thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks to all of the panel for all of your hard work. It is 2 hours worth nearly of sitting and listening carefully and absorbing all the information. So again, thanks everybody for doing that.
Yep, thanks again to everyone who's taken part. Thanks for your questions. If you found it useful, do encourage people that you know to sign up for our final webinar tomorrow at 6 o'clock. We'll see everybody again then. In the meantime, we'll leave you with that film that we started with, just giving you a glimpse of the completed Havant Thicket Reservoir site. And don't forget, you can get in touch with us via the website, our Facebook page, email. You can write to us as well, or phone us to request a copy of the brochure, or just to give us your views as well. So we'll leave you to enjoy the film of what the site will look like once it's completed in about a decade's time. Thank you and have a good afternoon.